again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Mordian Glory video. In today's episode, we are going to be discussing at length one of the most important changes to Warhammer 40k in 9th edition. Games Workshop has decided to remove the Armour of Contempt rule from the game. This is one of the most important updates to Warhammer 40k, and I cannot overstate the impact this is going to have on the Warhammer 40k meta, both the casual and the competitive scenes. And with that said, let's stop messing around and crack on with today's video, and let's dive right into this. So the first thing to go over is what the hell even was Armour of Contempt? What is this rule that has been added in and has now been removed a year later? What it did is it reduced the AP of any incoming attacks by 1. Basically, if you were hit with an AP -1 attack, it got reduced to AP nothing. If you got hit by an AP 2 attack, it got reduced by AP 1, so on and so forth. Basically, any attack that came in at you, it always reduced the armor penetration casualty down, but it never went to a negative value. So if you got hit by a AP nothing attack, you didn't get +1 save. It just reduced incoming AP down to a minimum of 0. When it was first introduced, Armour of Contempt only affected Space Marines, but by the end of its life cycle, it was affecting over half of the armies in the game. Marines, all of their different chapters, including Grey Knights and Death Watch, Chaos Space Marines, and all of their offshoots, and then you also had Sisters of Battle. And at one point, even the Imperial Guard were benefiting from this rule. The effect it had on the meta was profound. Overnight, you had armies getting significant durability power boosts. Marines dug into cover became a source of frustration for many opponents, simply because if you had a basic intercessor sat in cover and you hit him with an AP -1 attack, it didn't matter. He ignored the AP and he still got the benefit from light cover, meaning he was on a 2+ save. You had to hit an intercessor with an AP -2 weapon just to reduce him down to his basic save if he was in light cover, because he ignores the first AP with Armour of Contempt, and then you ignore his cover with the second AP. Then, even if you hit them with AP -3, they still had a 50-50 chance of surviving. So overcharged plasma guns, which are meant to be the quintessential anti-marine weapon, became very ineffective overnight. It caused many armies to really increase the power of the guns that they were fielding. One of the principal rules in 40k for a long time has been it's always better to have more crappier shots than fewer, more powerful shots. But that just wasn't the case when you were facing into Armour of Contempt. You could sling lasgun shots, you could sling heavy bolter shots into Marines in cover, day in, day out, and they just would not care about it. It became a case that you needed to go big or go home in order to be able to dig the power armor out from its lair. Even armies like Sisters of Battle, who do have power armor, but have traditionally always been quite fragile due to being toughness 3, became obnoxious to try and deal with small arms fire. In fact, I would argue that Sisters of Battle felt the benefits of Armour of Contempt even more than Space Marines and Chaos Space Marines, simply because they could spam the cheapest power armor bodies out there in comparison to anybody else. You can take a Marine for 18 points, or you could take a Sister of Battle for 11 points. They're both getting the same armor save. They're both getting Armour of Contempt. So overall, point for point, those sisters are actually more durable because you can just take more of them. But the big question is, why had Games Workshop felt the need to introduce such a powerful rules update to so many factions across 40k? The answer to that is simple. One word, in fact: lethality. Warhammer 40k 9th has been one of the most lethal additions of 40k in the game's history. The consistent power creep, the amount of damage output that many factions have been able to put out has been unprecedented, even in comparison to older, even more broken editions like 7th edition. In fact, one of the sayings that became common during 9th edition's tenure was, "We back in 7th edition now, boys." Power creep, and specifically AP creep, has been a big factor in 9th edition. You have orcs with their basic choppers going up to AP -1. 1. You have Tau fielding rifles at a basic AP. Every faction that's come out seems to have had a big increase in armor penetration values, which has frankly made armor saves worth a lot less. Before Armour of Contempt, armor values were seen as pretty much not worth the paper that they were written on. It was all about invulnerable saves. If you had a unit and it could not take an invulnerable save, you weren't including that unit in your list. In fact, Marines were typically spamming a crap load of Storm Shields on as many units as possible because Storm Shields helped you reduce the armor penetration characteristic and they gave you an invulnerable save as well. They were the best of both worlds. And because of this lethality and because of this AP creep, Marines and other power armed forces just felt incredibly fragile on the tabletop. It was not a difficult task to pick up a squad of Marines, even if they were in cover. And so when Games Workshop first introduced this rule, there was actually much rejoicing from much of the competitive community. Even those players that did not collect Space Marines or Chaos or Sisters thought that it was a good decision. And the reason for this, simply put, is Marines felt like Marines again. They felt like elite infantry that could take a beating and could put out a decent amount of firepower. Things seemed good. So if Armour of Contempt was initially welcomed by the community, why is it now that so many people are happy to see it go and Games Workshop seems to have bowed to community pressure and removed the rule from the game? As time went on, the community got increasingly frustrated with the rule. It got very prevalent, as I said, by the end of its lifespan. A lot of factions were featuring the rule, and it just became such a slog trying to chew through any kind of army that had the rule. And especially in the competitive scene where tables are so full of terrain that you can basically guarantee to get yourself that +1 save from soft cover, Marines actually became obnoxiously tough. And not just Marines, any army that had Armour of Contempt. Killing a squad of Marines went from being too easy to being too tough. Many factions would have to expend inordinate amounts of firepower, entire platoons worth of DACA, just to try and deal with a 5-man intercessor squad dug into a bit of cover. And because the vast majority of factions were running this rule, most players were encountering it in every single game that they played. And because of the prevalence of the rule, it went from being the needed shot in the arm for Marines to an annoying and frustrating gimmick very quickly. The community had its fill much sooner than I think anyone anticipated. On top of this, you started getting a little bit of a two-tiered society, with those factions that were able to spam Armour of Contempt doing much better than those factions that did not have access to it. It was also very unpopular in the Xenos community because it seemed like only Marines and Imperial factions were getting widespread access to this. The Chaos Boys also got it as well, but basically no Xenos or Alien factions got access to Armour of Contempt, and it just felt a little unfair and unbalanced. I personally believe that there were two straws that broke the community's back. The first one was when Imperial Guard vehicles got the rule. This meant you had Leman Russes that were toughness 8 with a 2+ save with Armour of Contempt. And it just made a lot of guard vehicles impossibly tough. And for many factions, they frankly found them unkillable. Armored Company lists went from fun, narrative, fluffy, memey lists to genuinely competitive and top tier overnight. You started seeing people taking armored companies to super major events. For example, one Imperial Guard player took an armored company to the London Grand Tournament, which has got over 400 players at it, and he went 4-1. And the worry of the community was that these kind of skew lists were only going to get more popular if Games Workshop keeps handing out Armour of Contempt like candy. The other straw that, in my opinion, did much more to break the community was the rise of the leagues of Votan. The Dwarves in Space have had one of the most controversial launches of any 40k faction that I can remember. Not since Tal being introduced in 3rd edition have we had a Xenos faction that has generated so much hatred and debate online. The Diggy Diggy Hole fan club could outshoot everyone, they could outscore everyone, they had the best stratagems, they had all of the best rules, and they had better Armour of Contempt than anybody else thanks to their Void Armour rule. For those of you that don't know, Void Armour was like Armour of Contempt, but it was dialed up to 11. Not only did it reduce AP, but also you could not reroll any wound rolls against the Votan. Space Marine Lieutenants, command point rerolls, all of it was out of the window. And this resulted in a big stir in the Warhammer community, because now not only did we have Armour of Contempt, but we had power creep and Armour of Contempt. Suddenly, being able to reduce AP wasn't enough. Suddenly, you had to be able to reduce AP and stop people rerolling wounds against you. Where was it going to end? Of resentment from the older, more venerable Xenos factions. You see, Leagues of Votan were a Xenos army, and they were the new kid on the block, and they had received an Armour of Contempt-like rule before any of the other Xenos races. A lot of people argued, why are the Votan and their essentially mining suits getting the ability to reduce AP, but my Necrons that are made out of living metal that are described as being insanely durable, they've survived 60 million years, they're not getting the ability to reduce AP, they're not getting this toughness boost. It just doesn't seem fair or right. And so, with the widespread complaints of rules creep, the general frustration being felt, and the concerns that some factions were being left out, the community as a whole turned against Armour of Contempt, and it was removed from the game by Games Workshop. But what is going to be the result of such an impactful rule being taken out of the game? Well, before we can answer that, we have to take into account that there have been two other significant changes that come along with the removal of Armour of Contempt. Firstly, many power armored units got a lot cheaper. You've got Plague Marines coming down from 21 points to 19 points, and you've got whole swathes of the Adeptus Astartes Codex getting big points reductions. In fact, I would say overall that Marines may have lost 16% of their durability from Armour of Contempt, but they've probably got about 16% cheaper across the board, thanks to the fact that their units got cheaper. And also, and this is the other point that I wanted to make, free upgrades are everywhere now. Free war gear is something that Games Workshop has been trialing with several other armies. For example, in the Guard, you don't pay for your plasma guns or your heavy weapons in your infantry squads. Well, it's been very popular in those communities which have got free war gear, and so Games Workshop has decided that now that they've run the trials, they're going to branch it out and give it to many more armies. So you're seeing a lot of free war gear on Space Marines, and you're seeing a little bit of free war gear in Death Guard and also with Chaos. Combining this free war gear with the general points reductions that we've seen, and Marines are getting a hell of a lot of bang for their buck. You can now get 10 Sternguard Marines, which is only going to cost you 200 points, and every single one of those blokes is going to have a combi plasma. In rapid fire range, that's 20 plasma and 20 bolter shots coming out of a single squad. But on the flip side, those Sternguard are way less durable. So taking all of this into account and combining it with the loss of AOC, and I think we can confidently say that Marines are going to become a much more Glass Hammer style faction. They are going to be able to dish out more firepower than at any other time in this edition, but they are not going to be able to take that punch back. At the same time, Marines are going to be giddy with how much they are going to be able to put into their list. As a Black Templar player, I know that I can already take way more Marines in my Black Templar tide. I used to be able to fit about 99 models into the list with taking into account the characters. Now I'm looking at 110, 120. That is almost a 20% increase in the amount of bodies I can field. And let me tell you, being able to throw down 100 plus Marines with ease is kind of scary. Not to mention the fact that now all of those Crusader squads are not just going to be running bolt pistol and chainsword, but they're going to be rocking pyre blasters, pyre pistols, power fists, all of the possible upgrades I could ever want. Despite losing a big chunk of their durability, I can't help but think that Marines are going to come out on top with these changes. At the end of the day, if you're able to field more models and you've got the firepower to do more damage to your opponent, then you're getting an indirect durability buff anyway. If there are less enemy models on the table because you can kill them easier, then you're taking less return damage. I truly would not be surprised if Marines ended up feeling as durable as they ever have been, and now they actually feel more powerful to boot. Just a little side note, but people are already coming up with some Space Marine lists that just have insane levels of firepower. They really are very different to what has been traditionally fielded, but there is a list that's being bandied around at the moment that is 30 Stern Guard veterans and 18 Primaris Plasma Interceptors. Apparently, you can fit all of that in your list for well under 2,000 points and still have enough room left over for everything else that you might want to include, like support characters. Don't forget, guys, that these changes are coinciding with the new Arcs of Omens attachment as well. This means that all of these factions, like Marines, like Chaos and Death Guard and all of the others, can take armies that are hyper efficient. No longer are they having to waste points on troops taxes. They're now going to be able to put all of their points into as much damage and DACA and lethality as possible. Again, if we add all of this up, the increase in damage output, the points reductions, the free war gear, the ability to take no tax units in the new detachments, and we are looking down the barrel of a Marine faction that is going to have unprecedented levels of firepower and efficiency at their disposal. Sure, they're going to die like shit, but if they get a good alpha strike off on you and they can get the drop on your army, you're going to have very little left to respond with. And even if you do get into a straight up slugging match with them, there's always going to feel like there's more Marines popping out of the woodwork. You're going to clear that objective of 10, 20 Marines, and only for next turn for another 10, 20 of them to pop out. It's going to be like facing waves of conscripts, except for now, those conscripts are wearing power armor and everyone and their mum has got a goddamn plasma gun. And what we're talking about here isn't just confined to the Space Marines, but the Heretic Astartes and the Death Guard have also received similar treatment. And what we're talking about here doesn't just apply to Space Marines, but it also applies to the Heretic Astartes and the Death Guard. Legionnaires and Plague Marines both now get access to free war gear, and Plague Marines have come down from 21 points a model to 19 points a model. It's a bit crazy when you think about the fact that it's only a 1 point difference between a Legionnaire and a Plague Marine, but the Plague Marine gets reduced damage and toughness 5. Pretty spicy. However, there is one faction that I think has really got the shitty end of the stick because they lost Armour of Contempt and didn't get any free war gear to compensate. I'm talking about the Sisters of Battle. Those girls are now in a tricky situation. They are going to feel more fragile than they ever have done. Everyone around them has received a power boost and they've just received a durability decrease. I think you are going to see whole bricks of Sisters being picked up off the table in very short order. Sisters are really going to need some decent secondaries to be able to shine in 40k now. I'm going to give the Thousand Sons an honorable mention. They didn't receive any points reductions, and they didn't receive any free war gear, and they did lose Armour of Contempt. But the reason why I'm not saying that they're a loser, and I'm going to say they're more of a side grade, is simply because their Balefire Bolters now got overall much better because they have AP, and there's no one out there reducing their AP values anymore. Well, apart from the Votan. But if a lot of factions are getting an upgrade and all you've received is a side grade, then you might find that armies like Thousand Sons, Sisters, and Grey Knights see a bit of a decline and become less popular on the tabletop. If I was to summarize the impact of all of these changes on those factions that had Armour of Contempt and they've now lost it, I think that we're going to see a rise in Horde Marines. I think Marine players are going to still be really infantry focused, although you may see some of the Primaris tanks get a little bit more popular. They have also received some points changes, but I think overall we're going to see Horde Marines become more popular, and I think we're going to see Marines spamming a hell of a lot of plasma. Everything from Hell Blasters to the Plasma Interceptors and the Stern Guard. I think hordes of special weapon Marines are certainly on the horizon. As for Death Guard, I think that we will potentially see even more Blight Lords being spammed. At the end of the day, Death Guard's whole shtick is being durable, and Blight Lords really are a very points efficient choice now. They've got some free war gear. You can easily put 30 of them in your list and have plenty of points left over for lots of other units as well. Big bricks of Blight Lords, I think, could become common for Plague Marine players who still want to feel like they're running the most durable faction out there. Or we'll start seeing them go down the Plague Marine Horde route, because Plague Marines just got 20 points cheaper per 10-man squad, and they still got all the free war gear, and so you can really spam a lot of these guys now, especially when you take into account Arcs of Omen is going to mean that you can get up to 9 or 12 troop choices. I think we're going to see a lot of spam coming from the Plague Marine armies. It's either going to be lots of Plague Marines or Blight Lords. As I said before, I think we will see the decline in Thousand Sons, Sisters, and Grey Knights, because all of those factions either got side grades or they got, frankly, downgrades. But what about those factions that didn't have Armour of Contempt? What about everybody who isn't a power armored big boy? Well, firstly, let's talk about how Votan have indirectly just got even better. If everyone around you has just got less durable and you have remained as durable and as killy as you were, you've only got better in comparison to everybody else. So I think that Votan are going to be a really, really strong contender for being one of the top factions in 40k. As for everybody else, I think we're going to see a quick return to a shooting meta, especially one that has a lot of Daka. Armies like Guard and Tau and Orcs who can really put out a lot of AP-1 Daka or Chopper are going to become very popular indeed. I may be biased here, you guys know I am the Guard dude, but I think that the Ashmetam are going to be in a particularly good spot because heavy bolters just became one of the best heavy weapons that you can include in your army. Think about it. They've got the rate of fire to be able to deal with these new hordes. They've got the strength to be able to still wound Marines on 3s. They've got AP-1, which actually means something now. And they're all damaged too. Which means that every single time you get a heavy bolter shot through, you're going to put down one of those Marines onto his ass. And pretty much every single vehicle in your Guard motor pool can take 2 or 3 heavy bolters with ease. I'm looking at Chimeras with double heavy bolters. I'm looking at Lehman Russes with triple heavy bolters. And hell, why not stick some Exterminator autocannons on top? Or go wild and start looking at things like Punisher cannons. Strength 6 with an inbuilt AP-1. Just bonkers. You are going to be able to mow down those hordes of Marines with your Imperial Guard. We have access to a lot of AP-1. We have access to a lot of high volume of firepower. And if you're not looking at heavy bolters, think about all of those las guns that are now AP-1 thanks to Take Aim. I think Guard is one of those factions that can really put out a lot of AP-1 or better firepower. And I think that they are going to be in a good position to be able to deal with the new Marine Horde meta that I think is on the horizon. Another faction that I think is going to have been really impacted by this in a positive way, that's going to get a big indirect power boost out of this, is going to be the Leagues of Votan. What we have to remember is that these guys still have turbo Armour of Contempt. And if everyone around them just got less durable, then indirectly and relatively, they just became more durable. I know a lot of players aren't going to be happy to hear that as well, because Leagues of Votan are already one of those factions that are clearly very efficient and overtuned. If they're going to be feeling even more powerful than before, because they're going to have all of the firepower they used to have, and they're going to have more durability than everyone else now, I think we could see a lot of people getting very frustrated with the Leagues of Votan. Or another way of looking at this is there has never been a better time to get your ass on the Votan hype train. I would not be surprised at all if we see Votan flying off the shelves, and I think if you're going to a tournament, you really need to take into account how you are going to deal with these guys. But that is everything that we've got time for today. Look, I think we can all agree that 40k is in for a real shakeup, and I think that there is going to be a massive impact from the loss of Armour of Contempt for so many factions and the prevalence of points reductions and free war gear. And these are just my thoughts on what I think that impact is going to be, but let me know what you think down in the comments section below. How do you think that marine armies are going to evolve and change to take advantage of their new circumstances? And do you think that Sisters of Battle are going to be in a tricky spot? Is there anything that they've got that might save them from going round the U-bend? If you've enjoyed today's video, then make sure you smash that like button and also subscribe to never miss an episode. If you've really enjoyed today's video or you found it particularly helpful, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. One of the big perks you get for being a channel member or Patreon supporter is you get access to the Mordian Glory Discord server. That is an online community with well over 800 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We're always discussing things like this, like tactics, army lists. There's also hobbying, painting, and there's even a really active meme section as well. So if that sounds like a ton of fun or a particularly helpful resource, we do have a lot of experienced players in that community, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. And I'd just like to take a moment to say a big thank you to all of the latest channel members. So thank you to Zoltan Hughes, mstubbs88, Benjamin Klarman, Marold, 13th Century Jackass, Fabio, Ethan, Taste of Wang, Aberrated, Grey Knight 1, LDZ, Apsalar, Sean Statsney, Martin Francis, and a nameless name. Thank you guys for your ongoing channel membership. Thank you for doing your part. I also want to do a shout out to the latest Patreon supporters as well. So a big thank you to Matthew Truell, Everson Chun, Alex DePaz, TS, Pierre, John Thacker, and Joseph Crystal. Thank you guys. I really appreciate your Patreon support. And last but certainly not least, I would like to say a personal, heartfelt thank you to all of my top tier Patreon supporters. These are the War Masters, the people that have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So I want to say a thank you to Bonbon Vert, Phil French, Ross Miller, Tekwal, Alex Dengal, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Swordfish Trombone, Diesel Fox, Tom Sutton, and August Varney. Thank you guys. Your generous support is a big part of how I'm able to do Mordian Glory full time. I hope you've all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching. And of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.